Okay, this video is going to cover the basics of drawing pencils, graphite pencils, and shading techniques. And so you probably, if you ordered a kit, you got a whole bunch of different drawing pencils, and they're all numbered, right, with this medieval kind of coding system that we've talked about in class. So as a reminder, we've got the HB is kind of the middle of the road. The HB is your number 2 pencil. It's the same kind of lead. It's going to feel very familiar to you. It's going to feel pretty comfortable. You can make sort of a variety of light and dark marks with your HB pencil. And if this is the middle, then it goes in both directions, okay? And as you get toward the B side, B is code for blackness. The lead is going to be softer and darker. So it's going to go from, 2B, 4B, 6B, 8B, or 9B is probably the darkest lead that you've got. Where's my 8B? Here it is. And then as you move to the other side of HB, it's going to be the H. And H means that it's harder and lighter. And so the lightest pencil you probably have might be an 8H. Now 8H is probably harder than you need to use. And so I would recommend stopping your collection of drawing pencils at 4H for now. And you can sort of feel what's going to work best for you. So let's just put these in kind of order here. Got 2B, 4B, and 6B and 8B on that side of HB, and then the H's on this side. Very, very important thing to remember is that in order to draw effectively and shade effectively, you have to keep your pencils nice and sharp. And hopefully if you ordered a kit, you got a little pencil sharpener in that kit. I recommend finding just a little receptacle, a box, or a cup or something that you can periodically sharpen your pencils into, because that way it's going to collect any mess that you've got, and you're really going to need to sharpen these frequently, especially the softer pencils. The harder leads you can sharpen to a very, very fine point and they stay sharp for a really long time, but then the soft pencils you have to sharpen a lot more frequently because they're softer lead, so they get duller more quickly. And then for the hard leads, the reason that you keep them sharp is not to use the point, but because you're going to be using the side of the lead in order to get that good shading technique. So we'll go over that in just a moment. I'm just starting out getting my pencils all really nice and sharp and ready to go. And then we can start kind of making a variety of marks with these. So we're just going to start out by testing out all of the different pencils in order. So go ahead and find your lightest pencil. So that's the highest number with the H. And you're going to just make some marks kind of in this range from light to dark. Okay. Now notice how I'm holding the pencil. I'm gripping it sort of around the middle toward the end of the pencil. And this is going to allow me to tilt my pencil down so that I can really get the side of the lead as I'm beginning to shade. And I've sort of had my index finger on the top. So just give yourself a little swatch here. And you're not going to press very hard, but give yourself a little bit of a swatch and then go ahead and write, 8H underneath that. And then let's move to the next one. And you're just going to do the exact same thing where you give yourself a little bit of a swatch, use about the same pressure as you're developing these little swatches, and then label them. I'm noticing that as I'm shading, and I'm really using the same amount of pressure for each one of these, I'm noticing that it gets easier and easier to make the marks as the lead gets softer. It just feels a lot more kind of smooth and gliding. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make a value scale. What I want you to do in this value scale is I want you to create 6 different values of gray, and then you'll have one space that's white. So I'm going to grab my ruler. I have an 18-inch ruler, of course it's not going to fit all the way on my page, but I'm going to try to center this in the middle of my sketchbook page. So I'm sort of spacing my ruler out about 1/2 inch from the coils of my sketchbook, and then about 1/2 inch from the outside edge of my sketchbook. If you have a smaller size sketchbook, that's fine, but I still want you to create as many values as I'm creating here. So I'm going to lay down my ruler, and I'm going to actually turn this on its side, or actually move it over a little bit so I can fit it all the way in here. But 7 inches. So I'll draw from 0 to 7. All right. And you're just going to make it 1 inch high. So I move my ruler over to either end, and I give myself a vertical line, a vertical edge, and just measure about 1 inch down. And then I'll just close off that box. Now I'm able to see through this ruler, and so I can line up the vertical lines underneath the grid lines, which is really helpful. You know, try to get a nice even box there. All right, now I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and make tally marks at each inch, because I'm going to break this up into 7 even sections. So I'll lay down my ruler here, and then I'll make a little mark at each inch there. And then that allows me to rotate my ruler and just go ahead and close off those boxes. So as I've just said before, you're going to go from white to black, or basically the darkest value that you can create using your graphite pencils, which won't exactly be black, but it will probably be that darkest, you know, 8B or 6B with multiple layers. So I'm going to go ahead and label this box on the far left. I'll label this white. And then we'll label this black, even though it won't technically be black. It'll be a very dark charcoal gray. And then the pencils that I use in each of these boxes are kind of dependent on what feels right to me and how I'm going to get that nice range of values. So I typically like to start with the 2H. The 2H isn't quite as light as the 4H, but the 4H is best for sketching. It's just a little bit harder to shade with. So I'll go ahead and begin with my 2H, and then I'll move on to HB. And then I probably will do like HB in a couple of these boxes and just layer them more in the second version, 2B and 4B, and then 6 or 8B to get that dark value. And again, this is probably going to be a combination of these pencils. Now, let's talk technique before you start shading. So I'm going to pick up my 2H pencil. And as I've talked about before, you really, really need to make sure that it's nice and sharp. The reason for that is that you are going to use the side of the graphite in order to get your nice, soft, even tone. This is tricky. It's tempting to hold the pencil as you are used to holding the pencil in the traditional grip, but when you do that, you're going to get more of the point, and you really want to try to bring it down and get more of the side. Okay, now when you begin shading, the temptation is to go back and forth like this, and just make these strokes, kind of like we did in the swatches up here. But good shading technique is actually more of a circular motion, and each kind of little circle is going to overlap the one before it. It should be short. You should be making short little shading marks. And I'm holding my pencil and I'm just shading very, very lightly. I'm doing very, very short, overlapping, rounded strokes. And what that's going to do is give me a really nice soft buildup. So I know that you probably are used to doing something like this, where you have a shape, right? And you go around the outside first, and then you work your way in order to get those clean edges. But this is not going to give you a really nice all over even tone. So instead, start in the corner, go very slowly, and then if you employ those very short, very soft, overlapping oval strokes, then you're going to build up that even, gorgeous, all over gray tone. Remember, press lightly. You can always make it darker by adding more layers of value, but once you shade it in there, it is actually hard to erase and keep it neat and tidy. Fill all the way up to the edge of the box and try to fill in any little gaps that might sort of show up. When you're finished, it should be the same gray value all throughout. I'll move on to my HB. I'm pressing just as lightly as I did with my 2H. But this time, because it's a slightly darker lead, it's going to show up more darkly with the first pass. Stay inside the box, but don't give yourself a gap between your shading and the edge of the box. This skill is really about being aware of your edges and appropriately filling your shading up to those edges completely, and not being messy and not rushing. So for some of you, this is going to feel like a really different pace. You have to slow way, way, way down. Okay, and so now you should take a little step back and compare. Does it look like this is the next darkest version from there, right? And if you get too dark too quickly, then you're going to have to go through and erase it. All right, I'm going to continue and I'll speed it up here, but I'm going to begin with my HB here. Pausing right here because I am noticing that these two squares look very, very similar to each other. So I know that I have to get this one slightly darker. I've been using my 2B pencil, and I'm going to stick with my 2B pencil for right now. And I'm just going to try to build up a second layer over the top of the first, only pressing a little bit more firmly in order to try to darken it just slightly to make it that next step down. This is interesting. My 6B is not getting quite the same darkness as the 4B did, so I'm actually going to continue with the 4B. Sometimes the graphite maybe gets a little bit old and it's not quite as dark as it could be. So I'm going to start out with the 4B, and it looks like that's giving me a nice kind of starting layer. And I'm going to go ahead and jump to my 8B. I'm going to try this out and see if I can't get it a little bit darker. And I think I'm going to press just a bit more firmly. This is such an important exercise for building the skills of shading. It's tempting to rush through it, but you really need to take a step back and ask yourself, is it nice, even blended tone? Do I have enough differentiation between the values? And so I'm stepping back right now and I'm looking at my values, and I'm actually feeling like these are very similar. And that these are kind of similar too. So I'm going to try to push it a little bit more and just differentiate this a bit more. And I'll go back and I'll just try to add another layer and see if I can't get it just a smidge darker. I can use my kneaded eraser or my precision eraser and just kind of clean up those edges, make it look really tidy and clean. That's a good value scale.